I was lying in an ICU bed with two tubes in my arm, a machine beeping next to my head, and a phone that had gone silent for 6 hours. 6 hours. My parents knew I was in that room. They knew the doctor had used the words critical and we need to watch her through the night. They knew I had no one sitting beside me, and they left anyway, not because of an emergency, not because something terrible pulled them away. They left because my younger sister's birthday dinner was at 7 o'clock and the reservation was non-refundable. I found that out from a text my mother sent to my aunt, not to me. A text that said, "Abigail will be fine, the nurses are there, we cannot waste the booking." I read that text alone in the dark. The monitor kept beeping, and something in me that had been soft and hopeful for 31 years went completely, permanently quiet. That night was not the beginning of the problem. I know that now. That night was just the first time I finally saw the whole picture with my eyes fully open. And once I saw it, I could not unsee it. Not the favoritism that had started in childhood. Not the money that had been quietly redirected for years. Not the way my name was always the last one spoken in every family decision. Not the way I had been told in 100 soft and polite ways that I mattered less. What I found over the next 3 months, on paper, in accounts, in documents I was never supposed to see, would shake my entire family to its foundation. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end, which started in a hospital room with a silent phone and a birthday party my family chose over my life. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something real. If the people who were supposed to love you most chose a dinner reservation over your hospital bed, what would you do? Would you forgive it? Would you explain it away? Would you tell yourself they were just scared and did not know how to handle it? Abigail did all of those things for years. She explained, she forgave, she covered for them. So stay with this, because the question is not just what they did. The question is what happens when the person who always forgave finally stops. If you have ever felt invisible inside your own family, stay until the very end. Drop a comment right now that says, "I see you, Abigail." You will understand why by the time this is over. I want to be honest with you from the start. I am not someone who likes drama. I am not someone who ever went looking for a fight or wanted to blow up my family or cause some big public scene. I am a woman who spent most of her adult life trying to be good enough, trying to keep the peace, trying to hold everything together quietly so that no one around me had to feel uncomfortable. I cooked the meals. I made the phone calls. I remembered the birthdays and the anniversaries and the doctor appointments. I was the one who drove 3 hours on a Tuesday when my father needed his car picked up. I was the one who sorted the bills when my parents got overwhelmed. I was the one who showed up, always, without being asked, without being thanked, because I believed for a very long time that love was something you proved by showing up for people even when it was hard. My name is Abigail. I am 31 years old. I have one younger sister whose name I will call Renee, and two parents who always told me and still tell themselves to this day that they treated both of their daughters equally. They believed it. That is the part that is hardest to explain. They were not cartoon villains. They did not sit around plotting. They simply built a life in which Renee was the center and I was the helper. And they did it so naturally and for so long that it became invisible to everyone, including me, until the night they chose her birthday party over my hospital bed. I need to tell you what happened in that hospital before I can tell you everything else, because that night is where the chain begins. Not where the favoritism began, that went back decades, but where I finally started pulling on the thread. I had been sick for about 2 weeks before the hospitalization. What started as what I thought was a bad stomach bug turned into something worse. I was dehydrated, I was running a high fever, and my blood pressure had dropped to a level that scared the urgent care doctor enough to send me to the ER by ambulance. I remember being in the back of that ambulance thinking that I should call my mother, and I did. She picked up on the second ring. I told her I was being taken to the hospital. I told her they were worried. I heard her sigh, and then I heard her say, in a voice that was calm in a way that felt almost clinical, that she and my father were already at my sister's apartment helping set up for the dinner party and that they would come as soon as they could. As soon as they could. I was in the back of an ambulance. They never came that night, and my mother, not my father. My aunt, my mother's older sister, who I will call Patricia, drove 45 minutes to sit with me. She was the one who held my hand when they moved me to the ICU. She was the one who asked the doctor questions. She was the one who called me at midnight, even after I told her she could go home, just to check that I was still okay. My parents texted me 3 times throughout the entire night. One text said they were thinking of me. One said the dinner was lovely and Renee had been so happy. And one, sent at 11:15 at night, said they would come in the morning and to rest well. I lay there reading those texts with a tube in my arm and a blood pressure cuff cycling every 15 minutes, and I thought to myself very quietly, they chose to stay. They made a decision, and the decision was not me. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know that some people will say it was just one night. I know some people will say parents make mistakes. I know some people will say they probably felt guilty and did not know how to handle it. I heard all of those things from people later. I even said some of them to myself in the days after. But here is what I also knew lying there in that hospital bed. This was not a one-night mistake. This was the most extreme version of a pattern that had been running my entire life. And something about being alone in that room, in the dark, with machines keeping track of whether my heart was still doing its job, made the pattern impossible to explain away anymore. They came the next morning. My father brought flowers. My mother brought a container of soup she had made at home. They were warm and apologetic in the way people are when they know they did something wrong but do not want to actually say it out loud. My father patted my hand and said the important thing was that I was getting better. My mother fussed with my blanket and said the nurses had clearly been taking wonderful care of me. No one said, "I am so sorry we were not here." No one said, "We should have come." The closest either of them got was my mother saying, very quietly as she was leaving, "We knew you would be okay, Abigail, you always are. You always are." I thought about that sentence for a long time after they left, because I realized it was not a compliment. It was an excuse. I was strong, so my absence was affordable. I was capable, so their absence was justified. I was Abigail, the one who always managed, and that label had become the reason they never had to show up for me the way they showed up for my sister. I was in the hospital for 4 days. Renee came to visit once on the third day for about 40 minutes. She brought me a magazine and a candle that she later told me she had just pulled from her own gift shelf because she had not had time to shop. She spent most of the visit telling me about how stressed she had been about her birthday dinner and how difficult the restaurant had been about a seating change. She asked me once, almost as an afterthought, if I was feeling better. I told her I was. She left shortly after. I stared at the ceiling for a while. When I got home from the hospital, I was weak and still recovering. I needed someone to stay with me for at least the first few days because the doctor had been clear that I should not be alone. I asked my mother if she could come. She said she would love to, but that Renee had just signed up for a pottery class that started that week, and she had promised to drive her to the first few sessions because Renee was nervous about going alone. She offered to send my father instead. My father came for one afternoon, watched television on my couch, and left by 5 because he had plans with his golf friends. I recovered alone, I ordered groceries online, I rested, and I started thinking. It started as just a feeling, a kind of low, uncomfortable awareness that had been living at the edge of my thoughts for years and that I had always pushed away because looking at it directly felt like too much. But now I could not push it away, so I let myself actually look. And what I saw when I finally stopped making excuses for everyone and just looked plainly at the facts was a family structure in which I had been the supporting character my whole life. I started going back through memories with new eyes, not angry eyes, just honest ones. Renee's college education had been fully paid for by my parents. Mine had been partially funded, with my parents covering roughly half and telling me the rest would be a character-building exercise in independence. I took out loans. I paid them off over 7 years. Renee graduated debt-free. At the time, my parents had explained this by saying their financial situation had improved by the time Renee was ready for college. I had accepted that, but now I started wondering about the details. Renee's wedding had been funded almost entirely by my parents. It was a large, expensive wedding. I had been the maid of honor, and I had also quietly contributed $4,000 of my own money to help cover some of the vendor costs because my mother had told me in confidence that they were a little short and she did not want Renee to have to cut anything. My own relationship at the time had ended partly because I kept putting family financial obligations first, and my partner felt like a permanent third priority. I had thought when I gave that money that I was being a good daughter and a good sister. I had not thought about whether anyone would ever do the same for me. There were smaller things too. The way my parents always referred to Renee's apartment as a wonderful place and my apartment as perfectly fine for now. The way family photos always seemed to feature Renee more prominently. The way decisions, from where we went for holidays to what we ordered at family dinners, always seemed to drift toward whatever Renee preferred. The way my parents talked about Renee's job with pride and talked about my job, which paid significantly more and carried more responsibility, as something I was lucky to have. The way they called Renee on Sunday mornings and called me when they needed something done. None of these things alone would have broken me, but all of them together, seen clearly for the first time, began to form a shape that I could not stop seeing. I want to be honest about something else. I am not a person who had been walking around feeling sorry for herself. I genuinely loved my family. I was proud of my sister in many ways. I was not sitting in my apartment building a case against them out of jealousy. What was happening inside me during those weeks of recovery was something quieter and more fundamental than anger. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop needing to protect a version of events that was never fully true. About 3 weeks after I came home from the hospital, I went to visit my parents for Sunday dinner. It was the first time I had seen them since my father's one afternoon visit during my recovery. Dinner was pleasant on the surface. My mother had made a nice meal. My father was in a good mood. Renee was there too, which was fine. We talked about ordinary things. And then my father mentioned, casually over dessert, that he and my mother had been talking about updating their estate plan. He said it in the way people mention going to the grocery store, like it was a minor administrative thing. He said they had met with their financial advisor and were thinking of making some changes to ensure that Renee was, his word, protected. I asked what he meant by protected. He said that Renee's husband was not the most financially reliable person, and they wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened, Renee would have access to resources that were structured in a certain way. I nodded and said that sounded thoughtful. He did not mention me once in that entire conversation. I waited until after dinner when my mother and I were in the kitchen cleaning up, and I asked her gently whether the estate plan changes also included any provisions for me. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not read and then said, "You have always been so capable, Abigail. You have your own savings, your career. Renee needs more of a safety net." She said it so kindly, so reasonably, as if it were obviously true. As if I were supposed to nod and agree and feel good about being the capable one, the one who did not need anything. I did nod, and I said that made sense. And I drove home that night and sat in my car in my parking spot for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. That was the night I stopped being passive about finding out the truth. I want to be clear, I did not go looking for something to be angry about. I went looking for clarity. I had spent years operating on the assumption that my family was basically fair, that things had worked out a little unevenly by chance or circumstance, and that the love was equal even if the resources were not always distributed equally. The hospital night had cracked that assumption. The estate plan conversation had cracked it further. Now I needed to actually understand what was real. I started by simply asking my Aunt Patricia what she knew. Patricia was the person who had sat with me in the hospital. She was also the person who, I slowly realized, had always known more than she let on. I took her to lunch and I told her very calmly that I had been doing some thinking and that I needed her to be honest with me. I told her I was not looking for drama. I just needed to understand the truth about how my family worked. Patricia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How much do you want to know?" I told her everything. What she told me over the next 2 hours changed the shape of the story I had been living inside. She told me that when I was 19 and starting call, my parents had received a significant inheritance from my maternal grandfather. This inheritance was enough to cover both of my parents' daughters' educations in full, with money left over. My education had been only partially funded not because the money was not there, but because my parents had decided at the time to set aside a larger portion of that inheritance specifically for Renee's future, believing, as Patricia put it quietly, that Renee would need more support over her lifetime. They had made this decision without telling me. They had let me take out loans as if there were no other option. I asked Patricia if she was certain. She said she was. She had been present for some of the conversations. She had even raised the question of whether it was fair to me. She had been told it was a family decision and it was not her business. I sat very still. I asked her to keep going. She told me about the wedding money. She told me that my parents had not been a little short when they asked me to contribute $4,000 to Renee's wedding. They had simply decided that asking me to contribute was reasonable because, again, I was capable and Renee needed more support. They had spent significantly more than the budget they shared with me. The shortfall they described to me had not been a real shortfall. It had been a way to involve me financially without telling me the full truth. I thought about the $4,000 I had pulled from my emergency savings. I thought about the conversations with my partner at the time, who had been frustrated by how much of my financial and emotional energy went to my family. I thought about the relationship that had not survived. Then Patricia told me something I had not been expecting. She told me that approximately 6 months ago my parents had transferred a significant sum of money, she believed it was close to $70,000, into a joint account they shared with Renee, described in family conversations as a security fund for Renee's household. This was money from their savings. This was money that, depending on how the estate plan was ultimately written, might reduce what remained for any future inheritance. This transfer had happened. No one had mentioned it to me. I drove home from that lunch very carefully. I was not crying, I was not shaking. I was doing that thing you do when something is too large to feel all at once and your body just focuses on the small mechanical tasks in front of you. I held the wheel, I watched the road, I got home. I sat down on my couch and I stayed there for a long time. The next morning I called a financial advisor I trusted, a woman I had worked with for 2 years on my own savings and retirement plan, and I told her what I had learned and asked her what questions I should be asking. She was calm and practical and helpful. She told me that if my parents had the legal right to make those financial decisions with their own money, there was likely nothing I could do to change what had already happened. But she also told me that it would be worth knowing the full picture of their estate plan, and that I had the right, as a potential beneficiary, to at least understand what I might or might not be inheriting. She also said something else that stayed with me. She said that very often in these situations, the person being shortchanged does not find out the full truth until it is legally too late to do anything, and that the most important thing I could do right now was to protect myself going forward. She said, "Stop being the family's free resource. Start being a participant in your own financial story." I heard that and I felt something click very quietly inside me. I want to stop here for a moment and tell you what I was not doing during this time. I was not planning some dramatic confrontation. I was not building a revenge fantasy. I was not talking to lawyers about suing my family or finding ways to punish them. What I was doing was something much simpler and in many ways much harder. I was changing the internal architecture of how I saw myself in relation to my family. I was starting to understand that I had spent my whole life operating as though their comfort was my responsibility, and that this had cost me in ways I had not been willing to add up before. I stopped doing certain things very quietly. I stopped being available for every small request. I stopped driving the extra distances. I stopped offering to cover costs at family dinners. I stopped jumping when my mother called because something was confusing or inconvenient. I did it slowly and without announcement because I was not trying to punish them. I was just trying to find out what the relationship actually was when I stopped carrying all of it. It took about 3 weeks for my mother to notice. She called me on a Thursday evening and she asked me, in a tone that was trying to be light but had an edge under it, if everything was okay with me because I had seemed a little distant lately. I told her I was fine. I told her work had been busy and I was still getting my energy back after the hospitalization. She accepted that. The conversation moved on, but I noticed that she did not ask any follow-up questions about my health. She transitioned smoothly to telling me about something Renee's husband had done that was frustrating and asking for my opinion on it. I listened, I offered a polite response, and I noted with a kind of quiet scientific detachment that even this call, this check-in about whether I was okay, had shifted within 3 minutes into being about something Renee related. It was not malicious. It was just the groove the family had always run in. I was the listener. I was the support. That was my role. Around this same time, something happened that pushed the situation in a direction I had not anticipated. My parents announced, by way of a family group chat, that they were planning to take a family vacation the following month, a week at a beach resort. The message included Renee and her husband and listed all the details. The cost was being covered by my parents as a gift. The message ended with, "We cannot wait to all be together." I was not in the group chat. I mean this literally. The family group chat that had been created for this message did not include me. I found out about the vacation because my Aunt Patricia was also somehow on the periphery of that conversation, and she called me to ask if I was looking forward to the trip. I told her I had not heard about any trip. There was a long pause on her end. I do not know if the exclusion was intentional or accidental. I genuinely do not. What I know is that it was a message, however it was sent, about who was considered central to this family and who was considered peripheral. And I know that when I mentioned to my mother, very carefully, that I had not been included in the group chat and had only learned about the vacation secondhand, she said, "Oh, Abigail, it must have been a mistake with the phone, you know how these things are," in a tone that moved on immediately. She did not add me to any chat, she did not send me the details separately. She said, again with that pleasant, breezy confidence, that of course I was welcome to come and she would send me the information. The information never came. I made a decision that week, not a dramatic one, not one I announced to anyone. I decided that I was going to stop filling in the gaps. I was going to stop interpreting ambiguous situations in my family's favor by default. I was going to let the truth be whatever it actually was without my help making it look better than it was. And I decided to do one more thing. I decided to talk to an estate attorney, not to fight my family, not to make claims on money that my parents had every legal right to give wherever they chose, but to understand, to be a participant in my own story instead of someone who found out things secondhand at lunch or by accident through a group chat she was not in. The attorney I spoke with was straightforward and kind. She told me what I mostly already knew. My parents had the legal right to distribute their assets however they chose during their lifetimes. The transfers that had already been made to Renee were done. I had no legal claim on past decisions, but she also told me several things I had not known. She told me that if my parents had made me certain verbal promises about inheritance, and if I had made financial decisions based on those promises, there were sometimes legal arguments to be made, depending on the specifics. She told me that I should document any such promises if I could. She also told me that if my parents had outstanding loans with me or I had contributed financially to family expenses in ways that could be characterized as loans rather than gifts, I might want to start being clearer, going forward, about the nature of any financial contributions I made to family members. She also told me to get copies of any relevant documents, not through any improper means but simply to understand my own situation. She said that people who are financially sidelined within families often discover the full picture too late, and that knowledge, even painful knowledge, was always better than a surprise. I left that meeting with a very clear head. Here is what I did next, and I want to be honest that it was hard, not because it was dramatic or confrontational, because it required me to stop protecting people who had not been protecting me. I went through my own financial history going back about 8 years. I pulled bank statements. I added up every financial contribution I had made to my family, the $4,000 for the wedding, the various times I had covered dinners or groceries or small costs when my parents said they were tight. The time I paid for my mother's dental work when her insurance fell short and she said yes. He would pay me back and never did. The time I took on the cost of having our family's home furnace replaced because my father said he would handle it and then he did not and winter was coming. I had never kept a running total before. I had always just done it and not thought about it. When I added it all up, it came to a little over $19,000 across 8 years. $19,000 I had given or lent to my family, with no documentation, no repayment schedule, and in most cases, no repayment at all. I sat with that number for a while. I was not going to demand it all back. I knew that. Some of it was too old and too undocumented, and some of it I had genuinely offered freely. But the number told me something important about the pattern. I had been quietly subsidizing this family for years while they quietly redirected resources away from me. The capable daughter who always managed had been both the most financially reliable and the least financially protected member of this family. And no one had said a single word about that. Around this time, something shifted in my daily life in a way I had not entirely expected. When I stopped filling the space, when I stopped reaching out first and offering first and showing up without being asked, I discovered something uncomfortable. I heard almost nothing. The calls from my parents slowed to occasional. The texts were brief and practical. My father reached out once to ask me to help him understand a document online, and when I said I was busy but he could email it to me, he said never mind, he would ask Renee's husband. I found out later that Renee's husband had no particular expertise in whatever my father had needed. He had just preferred to ask someone who was in the closer circle. I was not in the closer circle. I had spent 31 years keeping myself useful so that I would feel like I belonged. And the moment I stopped making myself useful, the relationship revealed itself for what it was. Not cruel, not hateful, just thin, just a connection that had always been more transactional than emotional. And that truth, quiet as it was, hurt more than any single dramatic event could have. About 2 months after the hospital night, I went back to my Aunt Patricia. I asked her to help me understand something specific. The inheritance from my maternal grandfather, the one she had told me about at lunch, the one that had been large enough to pay for both daughters' educations. I wanted to understand what had happened to the rest of it. Patricia was hesitant. I told her I was not going to do anything destructive with the information. I just needed to know. She told me that beyond the education funds and what had been used over the years for various family expenses, a substantial portion of that original inheritance had been invested and had grown significantly. It was now part of my parents' overall estate. She estimated, based on what she knew, that the total estate was considerably larger than I had ever imagined, possibly in the range of $400,000 to $500,000, not counting the property. And based on what my father had told me over dessert, and what my mother had confirmed in the kitchen that same night, the plan was to structure that estate in a way that specifically addressed Renee's need for a larger safety net. Whether that meant Renee receiving a larger share or the structure being built around protecting Renee's portion from her husband's financial instability, the underlying reality was the same. I was being designated, again, as the capable one who did not need much. I went home and I made a decision that I want to be careful about explaining, because I want to be clear that what I did next was legal, appropriate, and something any adult in my position had every right to do. I contacted my parents and told them I wanted to have a family meeting, not an argument, a meeting. I told them I had been doing some thinking since my hospitalization and I had some questions and thoughts I wanted to share. My mother sounded slightly nervous. My father said, of course, whatever I needed. We set a date. In the week before that meeting, I made notes. I did not prepare a speech full of accusations. I prepared a list of honest questions and clear statements. I also made decisions about what I was going to do going forward, regardless of how that meeting went, because I had learned something important. I could not control what my parents chose to do with their money or their love. I could only control what I did with my own. The family meeting happened on a Sunday afternoon. My parents were there. Renee was there because my parents had told her, which I had not expected but which turned out to be fine. I came in calmly. I sat down and I began. I told them about the hospital night first. I told them that I had been alone in the ICU and that the silence of that night had changed something in me. I told them I was not angry about that night in isolation. I was using it as the place where I finally stopped explaining away things I had been explaining away for a long time. I was quiet. I did not raise my voice. I watched their faces. My mother looked uncomfortable. My father looked like he was searching for the right thing to say. Renee looked at the table. I told them I had learned about the inheritance from my grandfather and the decisions that had been made about my education funding. I told them I had added up the financial contributions I had made to this family over the past 8 years and that the total was close to $19,000. I told them I was not asking to be repaid for all of it, but I was asking them to acknowledge that there had been an imbalance in how resources flowed through this family, into Renee and through me. My father started to speak. He said something about circumstances and about how they had always tried to be fair. I let him finish. Then I told him I understood that he believed that, and I told him that believing something does not make it true. My mother said that they loved both of their daughters equally. I told her I believed she believed that too. And then I said very calmly that love is not only something you feel, it is something you do, and that what had been done consistently over many years told a different story than the one they were telling. Renee said nothing for a long time. Then she said quietly that she had not known about my education loans. She had not known I had paid for mom's dental work. She had not known about the furnace. I do not know if that was completely true, but the way she said it was different from the way she usually spoke in family situations. It was soft and careful, and it sounded, for the first time in a long time, like someone who was actually listening. I told them all three things clearly. First, I would not be contributing financially to family expenses going forward without a clear written agreement about repayment. This was not punishment. This was just being honest about what kind of relationship this actually was. Second, I would not be adjusting my behavior to maintain family comfort at the cost of my own well-being. If I was not included in things, I would not pretend to be included. If I was not prioritized, I would not act as though I was. Third, I would be speaking with my own attorney about any future estate-related conversations, and I would not be signing or agreeing to anything without understanding it fully. I said all of this without crying, without raising my voice, without making it a performance. I was not there to punish them. I was there to tell them the truth about who I had been in this family and who I was going to be from now on. The silence after I finished speaking was the longest silence I have ever sat through in my life. My father was the first to speak. He said he was sorry about the hospital night. It was a brief apology, and it was not everything I might have wanted it to be, but it was real. He looked at me when he said it. I nodded. My mother cried a little. She said she had not realized how the years had added up. She said she had always thought I was fine because I was always fine. I told her that being capable of surviving something does not mean it was okay that it happened. The meeting ended after about 2 hours, not with a neat resolution, not with a dramatic reconciliation, not with my parents promising to rewrite the estate plan or Renee pledging to pay me back or everything becoming suddenly equal and right. It ended with honesty on the table for the first time. It ended with everyone in the room knowing that things had been named and could not be unnamed. I drove home and I sat in my car again, but this time it was different. This time I did not feel hollow or shocked or like I was holding something too large to carry. This time I felt something that was quiet but real, something that took me a while to recognize because I had not felt it clearly in years. I felt like myself. In the weeks after the meeting, things changed in ways that were subtle and in some cases surprising. My mother started calling me more often and not always with a request attached. The calls were awkward at first because we did not have the practice of talking without an agenda. But she kept trying. I gave her credit for that. My father sent me a message about 2 weeks after the meeting saying he had been thinking about what I had said and that he wanted to take me to lunch. We went. He did not fully undo anything that had been done, but he sat across from me and talked to me like he was genuinely interested in who I was, not just what I could manage for the family. It was different. Renee surprised me most of all. About a month after the meeting, she came to my apartment unannounced. She brought food. She sat down and told me she had been talking to her therapist and thinking about what I had said. She told me that she had known, somewhere deep down, that things had always been easier for her in our family and that she had let herself not think about what that meant for me. She said she was sorry. She did not try to explain it away or defend our parents or make it about her feelings. She just said she was sorry and that she wanted to be better sisters going forward. I am not going to tell you that one conversation fixed everything between Renee and me. It did not. There is still distance. There is still history. There is still the reality that she benefited from a system that cost me and that none of the money that flowed her way is coming back to me, but something shifted, something real shifted. The conversation we had that afternoon in my apartment was the most honest conversation we had ever had in our adult lives, and I found that I did value it. Not because it erased the past, but because it was real in a way that very little between us had been before. My parents eventually revised their estate plan. I do not know all the details. I was not consulted on every element, but my mother told me in a phone call that she seemed to have prepared carefully for that they had made some adjustments to ensure that things were more balanced going forward. She said my father had insisted on it after really sitting with what I had said at the meeting. She said she thought it was the right thing. I thanked her. I meant it. My Aunt Patricia came to dinner at my apartment one evening and we talked for a long time. She told me she had been waiting for years for me to see clearly what she had always seen. She told me she was proud of me. She told me that the hardest thing in the world is to love your family and still be honest about who they have been to you. I poured more wine and told her I had not done it to punish anyone. She said she knew. She said that was exactly why it had worked. I want to tell you something about what recovery from this looked like in my daily life, because I think people assume that once you have the big honest conversation, everything just opens up and becomes peaceful. It does not really work that way. What happened was quieter and more gradual than that. I went back to building my own life with my full attention. I was already doing well professionally, but I had been spending so much emotional energy on family dynamics that I had not been investing in myself the way I deserved to. I spent that energy differently now. I started saving more aggressively. I started going out with friends I had let drift a little. I started taking better care of my own health, scheduling follow-up appointments from the hospitalization that I had been putting off, making choices that assumed my future mattered. I took a solo trip that fall, just a week somewhere I had always wanted to go. I told my parents where I was going and they said to have fun, that was it. No one asked me to skip it to help with something. No one made me feel guilty for spending the money on myself. And I realized, sitting on a terrace with a coffee on my fourth morning away, that I had never done something like this before without bracing for some version of guilt or obligation to pull me back. And this time there was nothing pulling. Just the coffee and the view and the very ordinary, very radical experience of being somewhere I had chosen for myself. The monitor in the ICU beeped in patterns. The pattern said, "Heart still going, heart still going, heart still going." I listened to it alone for most of that night and I thought it was the loneliest sound I had ever heard, but I understand now that it was also telling me something else, something that took me months to hear clearly. It was saying, "You are still here, you are still here, you are still here," and it was right, I was, and I finally decided to act like it. There is one last thing I want to tell you, because I think it is the most important part of this story and it is the part that is easiest to miss. The moment I changed was not the moment I confronted my family. It was not the estate meeting or the conversation with Patricia or the attorney's office. It was much smaller and quieter than that. It was the moment, alone in the ICU at 2 in the morning, when I read my mother's text about the birthday dinner and I did not immediately look for a way to excuse it. When I let it be what it was. When I stopped rushing to protect them from my honest reaction to what they had done. That was the moment, not dramatic, not loud. Just a woman in a hospital bed putting her phone down and deciding, for the first time in her life, that her own hurt was allowed to be real. If you have a family like mine, you know how hard that is. You know the training that goes into making yourself smaller. You know how many years it can take before you realize that your smallness was never about your worth. It was about what was convenient for everyone else. Abigail did not win by becoming cruel. She did not win by becoming someone different. She won by becoming more fully herself, by stopping the constant editing of her own reality to make everyone else comfortable, by letting the truth be the truth. And if I can do that after 31 years of the other thing, you can do it too. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you, because I know there are people watching this who have been the Abigail in their family, the one who always shows up, the one who always manages, the one who is called capable as if that means they do not need anything. If that is you, drop a comment that just says, "I always showed up." You do not have to explain it, I will understand. And if you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, if you're still in the part where you are trying to decide what is real and what you owe and what you are allowed to want, then share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Not because it has all the answers, but because sometimes the most important thing is just knowing that someone else saw it clearly, said it out loud, and came out okay on the other side.